What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. We're on truck camper build part 4. If you haven't gone back and watched the other parts of the series, I recommend you go do that just so you can get caught up. If you remember from our last video, which was technically part 3.5, we had to redo our hinge system. Now that we got that all dialed in, we're working on the last few steps before we get this on the bed of the truck. First thing is going to be our gussets for the front of the camper. I designed and made these in Shaper 3D on my iPad and then actually sent the DXF files over to sendcutsend.com just like I've done on a few other pieces on this camper in the past. Cut them out, bent it, and sent it out to me and turned out fantastic. The whole reason I left this spot without any sort of cutouts is because I plan to do a 3-inch round ADV 4x4 logo. I think it's going to be pretty cool and really kind of personalize the camper and give it a nice custom touch. Ideally, doing this step with the camper upside down would make things a whole lot easier, but if you're like me, you don't want to have to remove everything and flip this thing over, especially when you're working by yourself. Gussets turned out good, ended up fitting pretty well. I ended up just doing a bunch of rivets. I thought about welding them on. This is like sheet metal, so welding to this really wouldn't do any good up top here. So I went ahead and just put a bunch of rivets down to the backside there and then also down from the top. Next thing we're figuring up is our latches. A lot of camper companies use these latches and they have a lot of good reviews. Biggest thing for me is I want them to be adjustable because when we get our gasket in here, it's gonna change the height of this, and when I'm mocking it up right now, it just kind of makes it difficult to make it perfect if it wasn't adjustable. This is the mark for where my awning bracket's gonna go, so I know I had to inset it enough from there. I also wanted to make sure I had at least 1 inch of space here because with our back wall, I don't know what kind of maybe gusset plate I'm gonna put here or anything of that nature, so I wanted to leave some space for that. So pretty much determined that we're gonna be about 1 inch up and about this far over. I want to say it's about 4 inches from here to here. So we'll go ahead and get all 4 of these latches on. And then we're one step closer to getting this thing on the truck. There are a ton of different latches out there. I will of course have these linked in the description. So take your time, look around and see what's available. There may be something that I accidentally missed over. I'm pretty particular when it comes to hardware like this, so I really took my time and did some due diligence and research before purchasing. We got 2 in the back, 2 in the front. Initially, I was gonna rivet these on like I mentioned. Can hardly get a rivet gun in there to do that. So we're just gonna keep these top ones riveted because it's so close to this edge, I'm not gonna be able to get a Rivnut in there. You can see I've already converted this side. So 1/4-20 bolts with Rivnuts on the bottom here, and then we're keeping those rivets up top. As you can see, just do that and close our latch, and that'll be how our latching system works out. These awning brackets are for the Alucab 270-degree awning and shower cube. I designed the bracket in Shaper 3D on my iPad, which you guys have seen me reference in many of these videos. And then I sent the DXF file over to sendcutsend.com and got them to cut and bend these brackets out for me. I did mild steel to help with the strength. I probably could have done stainless. It just would have been a bit more expensive. In the end, these will all be powder coated the same color as the camper. If you guys have been following along with the stories on Instagram, you'll have seen a lot more of these in the whole design process behind them. Just putting them into the video like this would just drag this video out even further. So if you're not already following, go ahead and head on over to the Instagram, catch a lot more frequent updates on the camper itself. We officially got the camper on the truck. I'll insert a little video here on the side I've recorded while we were loading it up. It was definitely a 4-person job. It's real awkward. Not that it's super heavy, or as it sits right now, it's definitely under 300 pounds. Maybe between 2 people you could get it on, just one in the front, one in the back. It was easy enough for us to do it with 4 people. Everything is looking good as far as clearances go. You can see we got plenty of room in between our roof and our cab. So as things are moving around, we don't have to worry about that hitting. We got plenty of room on our backside here. It may be kind of hard to see with the shadow, especially with our inset wall. If you guys remember, we did that. I got this thing sitting on the camper about exactly where it's going to go. So our back wall is going to be lined up with this edge here. So just for example, we have 1 inch of room, so the wall is going to be able to go up, and we'll have to remove some bits there. We'll get into that here in a little bit. It's definitely really spacious in here, and I think it's going to be awesome. I'm already thinking about the benches and stuff that I'm going to build, but we'll get into that into some later videos. Overall, really happy with how it fits. Doesn't hang out the truck too far. Our little bit of an angle kind of helps go with the view of the truck, not in the way of our mirrors or anything. Obviously, when we put our shower cube up there, it's going to poke out a little bit. I'll walk around the front here and get you guys a view from straight ahead. So yeah, it doesn't look too massive. You can tell something's up there, but it's not, you know, sitting way above the cab and not hanging way out the sides of the truck. I think it looks pretty awesome. But yeah, so next up is the back wall. So let's get right into it. Planning ahead is always a great thing, but there's certain parts of builds that you really don't know what you're getting into until you get to it. This back wall is a perfect example. I had a general idea of what was going to go down, but I had no actual clue of the exact design. So you can plan ahead all you want, but just know when you get there, you're going to have to make some tweaks and you're going to have to adapt to certain variables that you did not foresee in the past. Here's what we got so far for our bottom of our wall. I'm gonna build everything from the bottom up. So figuring out where things are gonna lay down here is gonna help me position the camper correctly so that the wall's sitting straight up. What we got is a piece of 1x2, 1/8 of an inch wall. This is about 57¼ long. I notched it out to fit around factory tailgate slots here. It's notched on both sides, so this can just kind of slide into place. This is a piece of 2" by 2", just 90° angle. That comes in at about 55¼ of an inch. You can see we have notched it to fit around the edge of the bed. Obviously, if you guys aren't doing a 2nd-gen Tacoma, it may be a little different than this. I've marked everything to kind of center things up. Now what I'm going to do is get this held in place. I'm going to put a few tack welds here, but so far I'm thinking this is looking real good to be the bottom of our wall. I just want to make sure that this thing is removable after it's all fully welded, because this back wall will have to be able to come out so it can get powder coated. All we do is just pull straight back and our whole assembly just kind of goes out of the way. I'll give you guys a different look at the ends here. I am going to clean these up a little bit, but you can see how I notched it, and that's to clear that bit that the tailgate kind of pivots on. And then this is our notch up here to go there, and then same on the other side. So when we go to fit our back wall after it's all fully welded up in here, all we'll do is just simply push the back wall into the back of the truck, and then it locks into place like that. I am gonna do some brackets right here, so it'll be welded to here, and then it'll be bolted to the bed stiffeners. I'm gonna do one of those on each side, so that'll really lock in this lower piece right here, and our back wall should be nice and solid to the truck. Some of you may be wondering why I would give up my tailgate just to have a back door, but I think in the end it's gonna be worth it. Being able to get in and out of this camper just by stepping up into it without having to get on the tailgate and then duck to get in, it's just gonna make your life so much easier at camp. Not to mention, we're still going to have a fold down table on our back door once it's open. So yes, we're sacrificing some table space, but what we're gaining, I think, is far more substantial. Also, losing the tailgate kind of offsets the weight of the camper a bit, especially if you already had a tailgate with a metal lining. They can end up being pretty heavy. This also allowed me to eliminate the swing out on my steel bumper. That swing out alone, I think, was close to 100 pounds. So being able to mount the spare tire directly to the door, deleting the swing out, and deleting the tailgate saved me a ton of weight right there in the end. Got our wall all finished up. I'm going to show you guys how it just kind of slips into place. So first we get our bottom lined up, that in there, and then push our top in, and there we go. I'm just going to go over our mounting points that we're going to have that are going to secure our wall to the camper and also to the bed of the truck. So this is the mount that I made on Shaper 3D and sent the file out over Send Cut Send. So this is going to end up getting welded right here, and then that slotted portion you see at the top is going to allow me to bolt it to the bed stiffeners on both sides. This is what is going to attach the upper portion of our wall to the camper. So these are going to be rivets right here, and these are going to be bolts that keep our wall removable. So basically the riveted portion will be here, and then we'll have 2 bolts that'll bolt it to the top of our camper. And we'll have this one on each side. And then lastly, this plate is actually going to replace one that I previously made. The reason why I left these holes blank is because I already have some holes drilled in this plate, so I'm just going to use this to stencil over that. This part of the bracket is now going to extend forward here, and then our little 90° that you see right there, I will end up, once the bracket gets in and I get all lined up, I'm going to weld a little piece of aluminum over to here, and then that'll be able to bolt there. So we'll have an attachment point for the wall here that'll fix it to the camper, as well as on this side, and then we have our top and also our bottoms covered. Another thing to note is you can see this bar, I have it flush, so that's part of the wall, and then this is the camper. I did have to notch this bit just that way so it can clear that weld. This weld here I actually am going to end up grinding down because our back wall is going to tie all of this together to strengthen these corners even more. I was leaving those welds just because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, and I wanted them to be as strong as possible until I truly figured out if I was going to grind them down or not when I was tying all this together. Yeah, so really next, only thing to do is to start working on our rear door. The main structure of our back door is 1x2, 1/8 of an inch wall aluminum tubing. Like I've said in the past, having a fixture table like this to help keep things square and hold things still while you're making something that is so important to be square really helps. I got this table from Northern Tool, and I think it was a couple $100, and it's been well worth every penny that I've spent on it. We've got our door all welded up. I just kind of got it sitting in place here just to show you guys what it's going to look like when it's actually in its position. I'm waiting on a few more parts before we can get the door actually affixed to this back wall. So while we're waiting, we're going to install some other brackets that just came in from Send Cut Send. These are going to be what attaches the camper to the truck itself. These are going to tie in our back wall and some other little bits here. We'll go ahead and get right into it. Because of the longer overhang on the cab on our camper, it is naturally front heavy, so having a back wall that is tied to the truck as well as the weight of the spare tire is going to help counteract that front weight. If I were to take the clamps holding the camper down to the bed, it would naturally want to kind of rock forward a little bit. So that's the other aspect of this back wall, is to help balance everything out when it comes to the weight of the camper. All right, so we got most of our back wall mounts in. You can see these are our verticals that tied into our bed stiffener here. We'll have 2 bolts on each side, so that should be plenty of tie-in to the back here on this bottom side. I know I don't have anything in the middle, but being the fact that we have 2 pieces here, it should be plenty rigid. We have our other brackets here, so we have our angle here that kind of helps with forward and back movement, and then also we have our tab that goes into our piece we welded on with a Rivnut, so we'll have another bolt in right here. And then the more I'm looking at it, I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and design an L bracket as well. That's going to go from here and then bolt to there, just so we have another point of contact between the back wall and the truck itself, because right now on each side, that's all we got. And plus it'll kind of help support this middle bit a little bit more. We have our brackets up top here that are riveted to the back wall, and then Rivnuts to keep our back wall removable. And then finally we have 3 mounts on each side that tie the side of the truck camper to the truck itself. When I designed them, I actually had a little bit of a gap here, and I thought I did my measurements right, but I didn't. You just kind of have stuff like this happens, but it turns out it actually worked out for the best, because this piece of aluminum, just for example, I'll be able to do an aluminum 1/8 L bracket that'll get sandwiched in between here, and then what that'll allow me to have is a mounting surface for when I build the benches out in the back of this thing. That'll just be incorporated into the rail. I won't have to do any uprights over here or anything like that, so that'll be real convenient and just kind of have everything tied together nicely. Next up, we're going to work on actually getting our rear door mounted. What we have on the bottom here are actually just some Durlin landing pads. These are also from Cut Sen. I just basically designed a rectangle DXF file with 3 holes, and then on their website you can choose to countersink bolts, and by countersinking it'll allow us to drill and tap a M6 by 1.0 thread, 3 holes into here. We'll have a landing pad here and also here. So when our door is completely shut, they'll be resting on these pads to help support the weight of the rear tire. You can see I also took a router and put a little bit of a beveled edge on here, just so if the door is hanging down just slightly, it has a ramp up and not just a hard edge to get sitting on where it's going to be mounted. As far as our sealing surface for the door goes, we got some 1x1, 1/8 of an inch thick, just aluminum angle. We have run all the way up to here with a 45-degree cut, as well as one across here, another 45, and then down. This is the seal we're going to be using. It's just a bulb seal with a little bit that just slides right onto our angle, so then we have a nice seal for the door to butt against. This seal will also help keep it from being able to rattle at all when the door is shut, even with the weight of the spare on there. Here's our door just kind of sitting in place. You can see we got a nice gap on both sides, and this allows the door to open and shut easily, as well as allowed us to have this 1x1 that we're going to have mounted to here. Next, what we're figuring out is how far we have to offset our channel here. So because I have my seal, I can see that when the seal is fully compressed, if I have it spaced about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, that allows me plenty of room for the door to completely compress the seal, as well as be flush with the outside of our camper. So now that we know it needs to be 1/8 inch spaced back here, we obviously have to make sure that this is consistent as it goes up. Just take a piece of 1/8 inch aluminum and made a mark, so I know that I can just kind of slide this all up and down the angle. I know if my mark's lined up right with that edge, it'll be evenly spaced and not tilted forward or backward. But we'll go ahead and get this all tacked in place, and then we can start working on actually mounting the door to the camper itself. I went with a 36-inch wide rear door. I did this because it had to fit my spare tire, which is a 34-inch tire. So obviously it couldn't be any smaller than that. And I didn't want to make it too much larger because I did want to leave a little bit of wall on each side. That way we have the ability to mount any sort of accessories or electrical panels or anything of that nature in the future on the inside. All right, so this is actually looking really good. You can see it's just sitting on top of our seal and it's poking out. Whenever our latch system compresses everything, we're going to end up sitting nice and flush, and it should be a nice tight seal. This trim I got on Amazon fits the 1/8 perfectly. Not too big of a seal, but also not too small. It's when it goes up here, you can see it rounds the edges real nicely. So it really just kind of makes this back entrance just look really, really well done. I just cut it just long enough to where it goes down to here. Like I mentioned, I may do a seal on the door just to get things mocked up. This is going to be great. I still got to go through and finish weld this angle to the structure itself. But for now, while the wall's in and everything's bolted up, I'm going to remove our seal. We'll get our door up here and we'll start lining up where exactly we're going to put our hinges. Here is where having a perfectly square door and opening really pays off when you're trying to even up all your gaps all the way around. As you can imagine, if one of these are not square, you'll end up with thinner gaps up top or bottom or side to side, and it just will end up looking funny in the end. All right, we got our back door all mounted. Like I mentioned, I'm still waiting on 2 hinges, but I went ahead and got all my holes drilled. Each of these hinges are rated for 70 pounds, so this should be plenty strong for the spare tire and anything else that I put on this back door, and actually maybe a little bit overkill, but overkill is good. And then of course we have our latch system, which I've designed, and that'll be a little bit later in this video, but that should be coming in here hopefully in a week or so. So what I had to do to actually mount the hinges, first off, I drilled straight through our back wall, and we'll have nuts and washers and stuff. I may not use this exact hardware. This is just stuff I had in the garage, so I used it to mock up and get this started. I had to do access holes on the back side of the door, and I had to do that because when I shut the door, the nuts and the washers would have interfered with our sealing surface here. Also, it would have interfered with our bulb seal. So this is an example of the bulb seal we're going to use. Basically, it just slides on like this, and when you end up shutting the door, it creates a nice sealing surface. You can see where it's going to sit. It's going to be right on the edge of the hole, so it'll still seal. I'm really not too worried about water intrusion, just because, as you guys know, the door is going to be inset, so it's not going to be easy for water to even kind of get in there and get around. Maybe I'll be able to find some sort of rubber plugs that fit in here that don't stick out too much. That would be pretty ideal. We'll just kind of have to see once we get there. Next on the list is we are going to start working on what's going to hold our spare tire. This is actually from Alucab. This is the same one they use on their canopy campers, and the reason I chose it is their design is very smart. So you can see how this moves separately from its mounting base, and that's because once you get your studs in the position that match your bolt pattern, you get your spare tire on there, and then this is threaded. So once your tire is actually bolted up, you tighten this nut until the tire itself presses against the door. And what this does is keep most of the stress off of the mounting points itself and kind of spreads it throughout the whole door. Their design on this thing is really smart. It's got a nice rubber pad here, so that way it can sandwich up tight up against your door without marring it up. This is the backing plate, so this will go on the inside and also act as support as well. So I just centered this thing up. We got our holes here, and we'll go ahead and get them drilled out. It's hard to pass up such a well-made product like this. Of course, it's fun to try to fabricate something like this yourself when they already have this made up and it works very well and it's simple and you can just purchase it and save yourself a ton of time. It really helps in the long run. So if you're building your own camper and you're looking for a tire carrier, I highly recommend this one. Got our spare tire mounted on our door. As I mentioned before, the way they have this set up, you tighten this nut and you can see the tire actually is pressed up against the door itself. I don't have this bolted on right now. It's just kind of sitting for mock-up. And the reason I had to get this on there and mocked up is because we're going to start working on our latch system. I was really having trouble finding a latch that I liked for this back door. I really like the ones that come on the Alucabs. It's a really great design, but I try to reach out and buy just that latch system right there. Unfortunately, they don't sell it separately from the door, and I didn't need the whole rear door. So I went and made a, I guess you could say, a copy based off their design. I just got my buddy, he has an Alucab, got him to take some pictures, and I just kind of replicated it to the best of my ability. Mine's a little bit beefier than theirs. It used a little bit heavier duty components. Not saying that theirs isn't good enough. I just went ahead and beefed it up a tad. I just designed this in Shaper 3D. It took a long while. I had to sketch out, you can see all my pieces over here. Once I got it all sketched up, I did my little 3D model, sent those DXF files to sendcutsend.com and got them to cut them all out. Here's all our pieces now that they've come in, but I just kind of mocked it up here just to give you guys a better idea of what's going on. So basically when I use our handle to rotate this will be mounted to the camper, and then this tooth, I guess you could say, is gonna press up against that and seal our door shut. Here we got a bushing, so we're not doing metal to metal on our pivot. This is what's gonna be mounted to the door. This is stainless steel. It is 316 stainless, so it's high corrosion resistance. I am still gonna get it powder coated. Very durable, and even when the powder coat wears off a little bit right here, I'm not gonna have to worry about it really rusting or anything like that. So 316 stainless was definitely the move on this. I've never welded stainless steel before, but you can use it in a MIG setup. So I've watched a few YouTube videos. I'm gonna do some practicing over there on the table and just kind of get comfortable with stainless steel here, and then I will start getting this all welded up. As I mentioned previously, it's nice to be able to buy a pre-made product that's already well thought out, and that was my full intentions when I was going to get that latch system from Alucab. And then when I figured out I couldn't, I just was looking around and I couldn't find anything that I truly loved and that I thought would work great and look good on the back of the camper, at least in my preference. So That's what led me to go ahead and design my own, and I'm really glad that I took the time to do it. Alrighty guys, we got our latch all on. I didn't really do a lot of time lapses on the process of welding this up because I honestly probably spent 6 to 7 hours just getting this welded up and making sure everything was right. So it was really time consuming. I did have a little bit back there that you guys saw, but I'll show you the operation of it. So you just lift up on it a little bit, start to pull back. You see our door opens. Nice and smooth. Everything is strong enough right now to hold the spare tire. I will be adding some more gussets as well as our table, which will strengthen things up. Then when it goes to close, so it's seated position, and then you just push forward, lift up, and there you go. All right, now I'll give you a better look at the handle and how everything's set up. So obviously you guys saw it on the iPad, and hopefully that made some sense there. But now you can really see how these teeth utilize this part of the latch to compress the door up against the sealing surface that we have inside. Our handle here, I kind of wish I would have made it angle out. You can see there's not enough room for fingers back there, so you just kind of have to hold it like this when you go to latch it. I did have to notch the handle just right here just to allow this to fit because of those screw heads. So there's still room for improvement. I can do some adjustments here on the handle and maybe go ahead and get another one. But for now, this one's gonna work just fine. As far as welding stainless steel goes, the welds are decent, but they're not amazing. And I think part of that is I'm using 75-25 gas, which you'd normally use for steel MIG welding. I read online that you can use it, you just may not get desirable results. So normally it's a tri-mix, but I think they're gonna hold. Tried to make sure that I had enough welds here so it can't come undone. So time will tell. When it comes to mounting the latch system to the door, I did drill some access holes. That way we can just do a nut and a bolt. And the reason I had to do that is because when we go to put our aluminum skin on our door and on our wall and everything, I can't use a Rivnut because, as you guys know, Rivnuts end up sticking above the surface slightly. So I'd have to do like a countersink on the aluminum sheet, and the Rivnuts don't have enough grip depth to be able to go through the aluminum sheet and through the 1/8 of an inch wall material and still be present there on the surface. So drilling a hole with some access holes in the back was my best bet for this instance. I know it will interfere a little bit with sealing surface here. I'm gonna end up looking for some rubber plugs that hopefully just kind of fit in here. Aside from that, I'm really not too worried about it. We got one last thing to do to this door before we can start actually putting the skin on our back wall here, and that is gonna be to mount our GP Factor fold down table. So I thought about obviously making my own table, but GP Factor really has this stuff figured out. It's got a nice locking mechanism. It's got a cutting board built in, so this slides out, and then you have a whole cutting board surface and end up with a nice big prep cooking surface. It also came with this backing already attached, and that's because it's designed for the Alucab canopy campers, which also have a back door. When I did my measurements, I wanted it to fit perfectly as it came, so then I could just utilize it to there. But when I added in my sealing surface on the back side, it kind of narrowed up my usable space. So I did have to trim just a bit off the side of this table. It was hanging out basically another 3/4 of an inch here, another 3/4 of an inch here. And what I used is this compact cutoff wheel from Milwaukee, and it's cool. They got this attachment, so it almost works like a skill saw. So that allowed me to just do a fence on here and have a nice clean straight cut, because I would have never been able to do that with an angle grinder. We're gonna get this door off, we're gonna get our table on there and get all the Rivnuts and everything on there, and then we can start working on skinning the back wall. Good thing about you guys watching me do this build is you get to learn from my mistakes, and obviously one mistake of mine was not considering the sealing surfaces when it came to the size of my door. Knowing what I know now, I would have just made my door opening slightly larger. That way my door could have been an appropriate size to accept this table. Moving on to the skin on our door, what I do is actually set the frame of the door down on the skin and trace it out so I have an exact size of something to cut. If I try to just do measurements and cut it to try to match, sometimes you can have some overhang on one end, or maybe it's not long enough here or there, and I really want to make sure that this is sitting nice and flush around all of the edges. Our back door skin is all complete. Just like on parts of the rest of the camper, I followed the same rule as far as doing rivets every 3 inches or so. You can see on the sides with our hinges here, I didn't put rivets because they would have interfered with how the hinges would have sit flush with the door itself. So think about that when you're putting your rivets in. And then once you get the rest of your skin on, you can just use those access holes from the back side and drill perfect little holes where everything needs to mount up. So that'll be for our bottom latch and our sides. Going into this, I wasn't sure exactly the shape I wanted to do, especially when it came to navigating around the taillight and bridging that gap in between the camper and the truck bed itself. Overall, I'm really happy with the shape that I ended up with, and I think it turned out pretty slick. We got our rear sheet metal pieces all cut out. I actually did cut one at first and I ended up cutting it a little short here, but it was nice because I ended up using it as a stencil for the next one so I could really perfect the shape of it. One thing I did when I was cutting it, you'll notice it looks like it's sticking out, and that's because I slightly oversized it on this outside edge. And the reason I did that is, as everything else here is all ready to be lined up, so I'm going to clamp it in place, get some rivets in it to where it's all sitting still, and then I can come through on this side with a flap disc and angle grinder and finish out the profile. If I just tried to mark this and cut it, I think in the end it would never end up being perfectly flush, and that would just kind of bug me. I did have to notch the corner up here for this part of the camper, so I'll get it all riveted into place, and then I can come through with the angle grinder and smooth all these edges out and knock off this edge, so that way it is nice and smooth with the profile of the camper. Utilizing some C-clamps, I held the aluminum sheet in place and drilled all my holes for my hinges, and this gave me a good starting point to hold my sheet still while I finished up the rivets and flushed up all the edges. We got our side panels on. We went ahead and assembled everything on the rear door just because I want to do one last fit check instead of just sending it off to powder and realizing something wasn't right. You can see I drilled some holes here on our edge. Everything's all nice and smooth. I will not put rivets in this just yet until we get it back from powder coat. I'll end up doing some black rivets that will somewhat match the coating, so that way it looks all uniform. And plus, riveting this back wall to the legs and the top of the structure will just help strengthen up this whole part of the camper. I also did some panels up here. So we got a filler panel up top, which will connect to the top of the camper. And then we also did one down below, which I think I talked about previously. If I didn't, it would have looked funny not having panels to match all the way around on the back wall. Next, we're going to start working on our side hatch doors. I talked about this in previous videos. I got a company that was somewhat local to me to take some sheet metal I had and bend these doors up to exactly the dimensions I needed. And I just didn't have a press brake long enough where I could bend all these edges and actually make it look all nice and uniform. So I got them to bend that. These will be our latches. So we're gonna have one on each side. And then these are our windows. They're actually from Eurovision. Exact same source for the Artic Tern windows, which you guys may see on some of the high-end campers. And I got them straight from Aussie Traveler. Deeply discounted from buying through Artic Tern, just because you're not going through a middleman. I'm getting them straight from the supplier. So I'll have that linked in the description. That way you guys get in on that deal as well. We'll be doing an aluminum piano hinge up top. We're kind of running on a little bit of a deadline here. I don't have a whole lot of time before a trip to Colorado that I want to be able to take this camper on, and we still got powder coat to do as well as the tent fabric. So I'm just going to run through some time lapses of getting these side doors all mounted up, and we'll get this video all wrapped up. As you can imagine, they have many different sizes of these windows that you can get, and this was the most cost effective and also most proportionate. I didn't want it to be too large and oversized, and I also didn't want it to seem too small and be more like a porthole. Still large enough that you can view out of and get some decent airflow through, while also leaving some space on this door to have some other storage. To make our holes in our door, we are just using a drill to start a pilot hole and then a barrel style bit in our router to actually make the hole itself. I do recommend you try to find a carbide one, but for this application, I actually used just a router bit set from Harbor Freight that was super cheap and actually worked great. I'm sure if you get a carbide one, they'll end up lasting a lot longer. The hinges for our door are just aluminum piano hinges. They're the same style that I used for the lift mechanism for our roof, if you have watched that video. I just bought them in a longer length. I did have to cut a little bit off the end of them to get them to fit our opening, but it wasn't too much. And finally, here we're utilizing our table to make our window frames, which I'll explain a little bit more here in the next slide. We got all of our holes cut in our hatch doors, as well as the door frames made for our windows. So now I'll give you a better look at what exactly I did here. So for our window to fit in the door, we had to cut an oval to the size of the edge of the window here. And because of how thin the door is, the backing plate could not sandwich on the thin metal for the window to actually work. So then we also had to create a metal window frame. We can now use our back ring, and that will sandwich hatch door as well as the window frame in between here and have our window nice and secure. I do not plan to rivet or even attach the window frame to the door in any fashion because it will be sandwiched by the window and held fastened to the door with all these screws. I debated on doing some extra structure out here to kind of stiffen up the door. This door already seems plenty stiff, and I think having this in the middle will just help strengthen things up in the first place. These are our latch holes, and these are the latches that I'm going to be using. You'll get a better look at these once I have it installed on the camper. What I use to cut all of my holes in my hatch doors is just a barrel style router bit. And this is not a special bit by any means. This came in a variety pack at Harbor Freight, and it actually cut awesome. It will be extremely messy. Make sure you wear your PPE and everything, because it just puts metal shavings absolutely everywhere, but it works fantastic. Now that we have all of our components for our door, I'm going to go ahead and weigh my door. This will help me decide on what size gas struts I need to help lift these side hatches. All right, guys, we got a side door all installed. Really happy with the proportions of the window itself and kind of the cleanness of how the latches look and everything. I do have just some small chunks of the gasket in here just to test kind of the compression of the latches themselves. We'll just kind of show you some operation here. So hit the button here to open the latches. And then of course now you end up with a little hook. And when I have my gas struts on here, obviously that'll assist in the lifting, and it'll end up lifting this all the way up. And then to close it, the same deal, you just push in here and push in here. And then we'll go in the camper and I'll show you some operations of the window. I do plan to put the screen / shade cover on this window once I get it all powder coated. There's really no point in me putting it up here right now, but we'll show you the function of the window itself. So if you want to open the window, you just turn your little latches here, push out, and of course you hear a click. It's got different clicks to where it'll stay open. Now if I want to actually open up this hatch from the inside, I can actually reach out of here and hit our buttons. Of course you can close this, and then I'll be able to open up our hatch from the inside of the camper without having to get out. And then even if I wanted to close it, I could pull the hatch down and push down on here, and then our hatch door is all shut. So the versatility of this combo of having a window and a hatch, they really kind of complement each other. If I didn't have my window, I wouldn't be able to open my hatch from the inside. And of course, having the screen for the window will give me the opportunity to have some protection from bugs if it's summertime and we're camping, but we still want some ventilation. We can pop open our side windows, we can pop open our roof vent exhaust fan and turn it on, and then I do plan to do a bug net for the back door as well, so we'll get plenty of air circulating throughout this camper and keep it nice and fresh in here no matter what the weather is or the situation. So really that about sums up the whole fabrication aspect of this camper. Now I'm just gonna have to take this whole thing apart, put it on a trailer, and take it down to get powder coated. So obviously I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm hoping to do that here in a couple days. I was hoping for this to be done for my Colorado trip, but I actually leave in just barely over a week. In the powder coat process, they say can take up to 2-week lead time. So unfortunately this is not gonna go, but we're just gonna take Amanda's 4Runner instead. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm really excited to get this thing back from powder coat and start working on the tent fabric. If you guys have been following me on Instagram, you'll see that I've already been practicing on a little bit of materials and making some various little things just to kind of prep myself for the actual sewing of the tent fabric itself, because that's going to be a much larger project, and I want to make sure that I know how that sewing machine works beforehand. So don't forget to like and subscribe, because I'm going to have plenty of videos in the future on this camper. We still got an interior build out to do, we got an electrical system to do, much more that's going to be coming. Next should be me getting the camper back from powder coat, and then actually getting it installed on the truck and getting everything all sealed up. And then probably the video after that will be the tent fabric itself. That'll just be a dedicated video, since that's probably very common thing people are maybe scared to learn. I myself was looking for any way to get around to learn how to sew, and then I kind of just broke down and realized that I was just something I was gonna have to learn how to do. And it turns out it's actually real easy, and I'm excited to show you guys how easy it actually is. So we'll catch you on the next one.